Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
It's good. Doing good. It's good to see your wonderful face.
You're the only person that
It's ever said that.
not even my mother.
Well, you know what's funny? So I know recently you had to go do some paperwork in Baton Rouge, and you stopped by the Secretary of State's office to see
Yeah.
someone that we both know. Well, Kaylee told me later that evening, one of her coworkers, Ebony, she could not believe that we were not related by any stretch of the imagination.
No, she when I walked in, she's like, "You must be Bro's brother," and I was
Yeah.
like, well,
We've been
That's
mistaken for that by many.
not the last time. I don't think.
Yeah, probably not.
Well,
Either we're both really handsome or both really ugly. Either way, we have solidarity.
they see it coming. They know. Goodness gracious. It's been a busy week and we've gotten a lot of stuff out. We did our first, not too long ago, we did our first musing about post, which is kind of the one thing I get to do every now and again is just sit down and write about something I'm reading about. And as of late, it's been Arnhem, but I got to show you, I got a cool stack of books the other day.
Oh.
I went to a used bookstore. So I couldn't help myself when paperbacks were only like $2. I was like, well, shut up and take my money. Also, LSU is having a used book fair at the end of the month. And I think it's Friday, Saturday. And I was like, yep, I know where I'm going. I know where my money's from. Book number 1, Tom Holland's Dominion.
Yeah, okay.
The Making of the Western World. I saw it and was like, we'll go ahead and grab that. Easy peasy. Now, the other ones are pretty much on brand for me. But, I feel like you will instantly recognize this book.
I already know it.
Yeah, Farewell to the Party in Lincoln. It's a good one.
Weiss does a really good job.
But I got rid of my copy of it, so it was time to get
a new one, a new used one.
New use, and yet again, right? And then this one I thought was interesting. I just saw it sitting on the shelf. Michael Hitzlich's The New Deal, A New History. I figured, what the heck? So thanks to Gary Haynes of Mandeville, Louisiana, for dropping this book off at a bookstore for me. His name is in there, soon to be replaced by mine. And then this is actually one that I've been after for a little while, but I couldn't find a cheap enough paperback copy of it because I wanted it to go with my H.W. Brands Trader to His Class, but Franklin Roosevelt by Robert Dallek.
Yep.
All right, so everything else feels like it fits in this one brand, right? Reading about the Great Depression, reading about FDR, and reading about the New Deal. So what's new?
What's new?
And I've been knee deep in Peter Caddick Adams books as of late because I'm thumbing through Snow and Steel, looking for an obscure World War II unit. So if any of our listeners just happen to know anything about the 1195th Base Engineer Depot Battalion, or the 291st Engineer Battalion, or the 989th Quartermaster Service Company, you know where to find me. 291 is easy. They're pretty much in every book about the Battle of the Bulge ever written. It's the other two that I'm having a hard time finding. So, anyways, we're not here to talk about me. We're not here to talk about this. We're here to talk about Canada and the First World War.
Canada. We've been very Canadian lately.
We have been. We did the World War II episode with Mike Bechtel, which I think way we'll release this. Naturally, you'll hear this one first, and then you'll hear Mike's episode, which I thought that was really a lot of fun. But as we've already kind of talked about here, and you and I before the show with our guest, to understand Canada in the Second World War, really need to understand Canada in the First World War. So we'll do all that in just a minute. But if you are a member of the Homebrew crew and you are on our Buy Me a Coffee page, you get to hear both episodes same day on a Monday release. If not, you'll have to wait around until Wednesday to get World War II. What spoiler, who will win? Right? But anyways, let's bring on our guest. We'll go ahead here in just a second. I'm trying to get this to load up. There we go. let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Brad St. Croix. Brad is the kind of the manager of the On This Day in Military History page on, well, it used to be Twitter, now X, but he's on Blue Sky, and that's where we reunited after my Twitter exodus, running with my hair on fire away from that garbage can. But anyways, we're glad to have you, Brad.
No, thanks for having me on. It's always a good chance or opportunity to talk about Canada at all. So especially First World War, I don't get to do it as much as I would like. So it's always nice to have a chance.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know, and I think Joey's absolutely right. Without a decent understanding of Canada at war in the First World War, it's almost incomprehensible to do the same for Canada in the Second World War. So
give Brad credit. I stole that from him.
What's that? Yeah, that's fair. That's true. I mean, he's absolutely right. Hammer, meat, nailhead. So I know that today that we're going to kind of divide this episode into a couple of parts. We're going to kind of look at the Canadian home front and some issues there, and of course, we're going to look at Canada abroad. So, Brad, kind of just for our listeners' sake, what does the Canadian home front look like, especially in the early years of the First World War?
So the home front goes to war willingly. It doesn't technically matter because Canada doesn't have control of its own foreign policy. 1914, that doesn't come until after the First World War. So when Britain declares war, Canada's automatically at war. But it's still met with massive enthusiasm across the country. That's pretty much a universal scene there. I mean, there's a large German ethnic population in certain parts of the country, mostly located in what used to be called Berlin, Ontario. It's now Kitchener, Ontario. So there's some obviously mixed feelings in places like that, and some places out in the prairies, or what you guys call the Midwest. So there's some pockets there as well, but it's pretty much a universal excitement. Again, as we'll be talking about probably throughout this entire episode, but Quebec is very different in a lot of ways. There's not the same sort of excitement amongst the French-speaking population of Quebec, which is the majority in that province. But they still do enlist and all that, just like the rest of the country. But it's going to come to a head in a different issue that we'll get to. But at the beginning, it's a very rural country, not really had urbanized all that much. That doesn't come again until much later, largely because of this war. Probably bring this up again as well, but the First World War has massive impacts on Canada and creates the country we know today. Obviously, Second World War does as well, but sometimes I like to argue that the First World War is really that really massively impactful war that sets modern Canada kind of on the path that it's on. So yeah, you have a very largely rural country, very, very reliant for economics on resources. That's pretty much the entire economy. Things like lumber, minerals, agriculture is massive. There's not really a large industrial base in Canada, really at all. But yeah, and it's largely a British population. And I use that word specifically because they would see themselves as Brits. They're British, they're Canadians, but they're British. They go together. They don't conflict with each other. It's very complicated in that sense. One is kind of the same when you're in Canada. They use the same flag. Literally, Canada doesn't really have a flag. They do, but it's not used as much as the Union Jack. Again, we'll see. You see changes with that later. But yeah, English is very predominant. Outlook is very British, right? The Royal Navy and all of that. The Empire. Canada sends troops to fight in South Africa at the beginning of the 20th century. So that kind of just really shows that there is this strong imperial connection. And once war is declared in August 1914, Canada jumps right in, right? You see the same pictures and crowds in the streets of Montreal that you do in London. It's no real different there. But again, changes will be coming. And actually in Canada, it gets rather violent, surprisingly, in Canada itself, which is something that most people don't know. Even in Canada, doesn't really get talked about a lot. But in 1914, it's a very different country than it will be in, say, 1918 and then to, say, 1939. Again, massive changes are coming.
So as the Canadian Army, British Army at this point, heads off to war in 1914, what's their first sort of look at the war or their first experience in the war? What does it look like?
Well, the British Army is very different than the Canadian Army at this point. The Canadian Army is tiny. It's very, very small.
Mhm.
It's mostly militia, which has been, argued as akin to basically social clubs for those of the elites of the towns, basically. They don't really do much. They don't really train. They kind of just hang out and drink and then kind of run around the woods and the backcountry in the summertime. And that's pretty much
Members of
it.
the homebrew crew.
Yeah. There's some similarities. Yeah. But it's not very well trained. It's not very well organized. And it takes a long time for the Canadians to get up to par to go. It's raised as a first contingent. That's what it's called, which becomes the first Canadian division. It's a bit slapdash at the beginning. Not well equipped at all. Probably heard tons about the infamous Ross rifle. They are quickly trained at a place that's called Valcartier, still a Canadian Army, military base to this day. That camp is literally built as the war is ramping up. Like it was an empty field. They decide the defense minister decides to build this camp to concentrate the first contingent. It's a bit of a mess. This minister named Sam Hughes is a bit of a, let's say, corrupt. I mean, it's normal for the time in Canada in 1914, or really pretty much all the Western democracies, to be honest. But he's doing things like giving contracts to cronies who make boots out of paper. Obviously, they dissolve in water and it doesn't go well. He's just giving out contracts like it's nobody's business. And most of it is done so poorly that once these Canadians eventually do make it overseas, it's not for a bit yet, right? Because they're still training. They're not trained for war. They don't really get into the action until 1915. They basically have to be re-equipped by the Brits. In most areas, they don't have heavy artillery. They don't have any of that stuff. They have, again, the Ross rifles, pretty much all they have of their own. Everything else has got to come through the Brits, through the British supply lines, which doesn't really change over the course of the war. Massively, Canadian Corps is supported by British logistics and manufacturing for a good chunk of the war. So yeah, they're not really ready. It takes a long time to get into a state of somewhat readiness, right? And then that goes into 1915, right? As we know, the trench warfare is pretty much solidified by that point. They've kind of come up with a system of getting new units to sort of rotate in and get a little experience in the trenches at first. And then that's kind of how the Canadians really get their first experiences of combat. It's very minimal at first, but it's also kind of piecemeal. Kind of hard to explain if you don't really understand it. Canada has the same regimental system that Britain does, right? Mm-hmm. So battalions are raised through the regiments, which are basically like a home organization, and you can raise battalions off of that. I just like to talk about it because it's, again, still a unit today of the regular Canadian Army is the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. They're the actual first Canadian unit to go ahead. They go on their own because they're privately raised with private money. So it's an interesting way of, this is very slapdash all over the place. And that unit's first. Then they integrate into the Canadian Corps much later. Also the same with the only Canadian regular unit in the time in 1914 is sent off to Bermuda to do garrison duty because the defense minister doesn't trust the regular force, doesn't think they're good soldiers. He wants to rely on the militia because supposedly the militia are better. So they're kind of just sent off to Bermuda for a while. They don't even join again until much later as well. So it could be a bit confusing with the organization. And also one thing that I do want to mention as well is there's a plan in Canada to raise an expeditionary force, just like there is in Britain at the time. Mm-hmm. Once war breaks out, that minister, Sam Hughes, throws it out the window. It's completely destroyed. He takes away all of the system that has the local regiments to raise battalions to send them off. He destroys all that, comes up with this numbered battalion system. So that's why you'll see like 44th Battalion and no other markings, like if you're looking on a map of, say, like Vimy Ridge or something. So that's how it goes. Those are usually tied to regiments back in Canada, but it can be a bit confusing. And then also people are moving throughout these numbers and all over the place. He's firing and hiring people at the drop of a hat. It's a big mess. And it comes to kind of a head in 1915. The first experience really of battle for the Canadian First Division at the Battle of Second Ypres.
Paper boots sound about as useful as concrete swimming shoes or a Jello hammer.
Yeah, it's bad.
I was unfamiliar with something that you could make boots out of paper, but there's human corruption and innovation, as it were.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that Canada 1914 is a mostly small citizen-based army.
Yeah.
So in order to bolster these numbers, which is looking into Canada's war efforts, prior to getting on the show. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that Canada sort of experiences an unprecedented level of patriotic, fever, and people are willing to, sign up to, do their bit, so to speak. When it comes to that, obviously Canada's still got a long way to build a formidable fighting force. So does Canada incorporate things like conscription?
Not right away. So that is the most contentious part of Canada's First World War is the introduction of conscription. So just really quickly, you have years 1915 through 16 are all volunteer based. It's all volunteer. There are no conscripts whatsoever, no conscription whatsoever. Things start to come ahead in 1917. The great victory at Vimy Ridge, in a lot of ways, directly and indirectly, is what sets off what's called the conscription crisis. The Canadian Corps takes so many casualties during the fighting at Vimy Ridge, and numbers of recruitment had dropped off so badly, they can't get the numbers back up. And the war is obviously not over, right? In spring 1917, they want to keep the Canadian Corps up to strength with the five divisions. It's another weird story. Maybe we can get to later, but it's trying to keep it all up to strength. And the Prime Minister at the time, Robert Borden, decides we need conscription for this. So this sets off the most corrupt election in Canadian history, the 1917 election. That poster is probably one of the nicer ones that they release. So what happens is same parties of today. You have the Liberal Party who's not in power, and you have the Conservative Party that is in power. So once this conscription is brought up and everything, they decide, okay, we'll have a de facto referendum on this by having an election. So what happens is the Liberal Party is split pretty much 50-50 of pro-conscription and anti-conscription. The pro jump on to what is the Conservative government, which is on this poster here says Union government. That's what they call themselves. So that kind of rips that party in half and leads to an extremely contentious election. There, again, like I said, that's a nicer one. I didn't want to grab anything worse because there's some nasty stuff out there directed towards French Canadians. They're seen not to be doing their bits. The numbers obviously are not proportional to the population, but they're still pretty high. Again, this idea of the slacker, those who won't enlist, haven't done their bits. There's some photos of graffiti or whatever saying the slacker, it's your turn now to die, basically. And that kind of brings me to the point I wanted to make is it's always assumed that it's just Quebec that's not happy about the conscription and everything like that. And that's not the case. There's a large urban-rural divide in terms of support for conscription. Like I said, Canada is mostly a rural country, still is throughout the war. And this is, the early 20th century. You need people to work the farms, right? It's not the equipment of today. You need hands to do this stuff. And there's rules in place that stop, the sons of farmers from going. So they're okay with conscription until that rule is removed. My own great-grandfather was one of those, lived on a farm outside Windsor, Ontario, and is conscripted as soon as that rule is gone. He's sent off. So it's just an interesting way of looking at this, and it doesn't quite line up to people's perceptions of what's going on in terms of support and anti-support of conscription. So the Union government wins that election, and they're in power for quite a few years after that, and the war as well. But it gets violent at points because there are riots, which are fairly common for, pretty much everywhere at this point in the world. Riots are something to do. I mean, Canada, again, has this false perception of we're peaceful all the time. I'm like, up until like the
Not all the time.
1930s, we're rioting like every other week. Like there's always something going on. Like this is no different during the war. However, in these riots, Canadians are shooting at each other. That is really not seen like this. There is some kind of mixed accounts of what happens. There's what becomes a riot in Quebec around Easter time. Some of the troops are sent in. Actually, they're conscripts, a good chunk of them from Ontario, which has, again, that issue there. A bunch of Englishmen come in to kill us. And apparently shots are fired from the crowd. I've never been able to confirm that that's the case, but there's like rocks and snow and bottles and things are thrown. But shots are fired. Canadians are killed. 4 are killed as a result when the troops open fire. And it's the closest Canada has ever come to a civil war. It is really, really contentious. Really, really lots of anger. There's still anger today towards this. And I see it often. A lot of mistrust from certain people towards certain political parties because of this, sending them off to fight when they didn't want to for an empire they don't identify with, an empire that conquered them previously. So they don't really see it as their fight. They're okay. They want to defend Canada, but they don't want to defend Britain. So it becomes quite a violent, angry time that doesn't really kind of resolve itself really at all until the Second World War. And I'm sure you guys talked about that with Mike and what that looked like and how that was handled by Mackenzie King in the Second World War. But in the First World War, it's not handled well. Conscripts do make a difference in the front line. There are a fair number of them. No evidence that they don't fight well. Actually, a lot of them are highly decorated, and they do make a difference towards the end, which we'll get into with the 100 Days offensive and things like that. But you have, like, this is a protest. There's no photos of that infamous one where anyone's killed that I've ever seen. But there's many of these, all kinds of protests and all this kind of stuff. And other people are killed as well. Labor leaders are imprisoned and beaten and shot. And it's a very violent time in Canadian history, period.
But I think what we should do right now is let's hop out and take a quick little commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll pick up with Canada on the front lines. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Did you know that Homebrew History is brought to you by Civil War Trails? Civil War Trails is the world's largest outdoor museum with over 1,600 sites to visit, where you can follow along the pathways of armies on the move, or simply sit back near a restaurant or on your way to Frederick Douglass's house while you are out on your own family vacation. Civil War Trails is the ultimate way to get out there and make some history of your own. Hop out the car, grab a picture with that sign. Be sure to share it on social media using the hashtag #ShineSelfie and help spread the word about Civil War Trails. Want to get involved? Want to even support Homebrew History? Best way to do it is by becoming a member, and you can ask questions of our guests using our member questions segment. And then finally, if you want to find a way to contribute to the show in another very beneficial way, very substantial way, very appreciated way, you can support us on Buy Me a Coffee. Simply visit Homebrew History's page there and become a member of the Homebrew crew for as little as $5 a month. You get exclusive bonuses like exclusive episodes, early and advanced listening and viewership of our upcoming episodes. You also get a chance there to ask our guests questions in the week leading up to their recording, and other things that you'll get to see on there. The Musing About segment, which is kind of my deal now, I guess, where I'll sit back and write about something that I'm reading about. Get ready for a lot of stuff about maroon berets, I guess, until I get around to these FDR books. But go on to the Buy Me a Coffee page. Be sure to help us out wherever you can. And please know that we now air weekly. You can catch these episodes every single Monday, and exclusive episodes or bonus episodes dropping on Wednesdays. Designs are by the bearded historian, Jeff Williams. You can check out Jeff's stuff on his Etsy page, and you can find a link for that down in the show notes and in the description. But now I think we'll go ahead and we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Homebrew History. There we go. All right. Yay. Somehow. And we're back with Canada at War with Greg St. Croix.
We didn't go anywhere. We were just here chilling, but hey, you know what? We're back now.
Everybody was still here. Everybody was still there. Sorry. All right. It's awkward because I don't know what to do.
Yeah. What we can, I suppose.
The audio side of it doesn't seem that bad. It's the visual of two guests and they're going. They look like my daughter when I have her on the car camera and I can't see her, I can't hear her anything. I can just see her doing this and that.
So I guess, Brad, we're back talking about Canada and hopefully not paper boots on the ground. Can you imagine the first individual that got a brand new, fresh pair of boots and they just, literally just disintegrated off their feet? What that person's got to think, I know some people have made like dissolvable clothing items in the past, which is terrible, a terrible idea. But feet are incredibly important, especially in the First World War. Everyone's always talking about trench foot.
Yeah.
So paper boots ain't gonna fix that anytime.
Yeah, it was bad, and that's before even getting on the boat to cross the Atlantic. So exactly. I mean, it was not good. And again, it took Britain basically pulling them out of the fire, as they say, to equip these guys so that they could go fight. Right? It's just it's not looked at as much as it should be when we kind of talk about the First World War here in Canada. A very mythologized view of it here, so don't really get into the nasty stuff all that much.
So, Brad, tell our listeners a little bit about the first sort of contact that Canada has, on these European battlefields.
So the first major battle is the Battle of Second Ypres in April 1915. So first Battle of Ypres in 1914, right, when the so-called race to the sea is taking place, trying to outmaneuver each other, gain the last flank, and kind of hopefully stop them, which of course doesn't happen on either side. So the Canadians are brought in to the line and done, just a little bit at a time, unit at a time, to kind of get some experience from those who had already been fighting. You see a little bit of that, a little bit of holding the line, not too much. It's not till Second Ypres, so this is in April 22nd, 1915, is the first asphyxiating gas attack on the Western Front. Some say in the war, there's use of, I think, tear gas on the Eastern Front, but in the Western Front, this is asphyxiating gas. And it's actually to the left of the Canadians. So the 1st Canadian Division is holding the line as part of the salient there, where the Germans try out this new weapon they had been developing. And chaos breaks out, basically. It's a French, Moroccan, Algerian division to their left. Again, mixed opinions, mixed accounts of what happens. Obviously, a lot of the units break and run. I mean, it's not like I blame them. Nobody knows what this is. And it's just causing mass panic and quick death for some people. So they break. The Canadians try to hold the line as best as they can, trying to fill in the gaps. It's not going well. They have to fall back, continually falling back because they don't want to lose the salient because it had taken on such a symbolic importance, right? It's this last little chunk of Belgium that's still in Allied hands. They want to hold it. So the Canadians are getting their first experience of combat while the line is breaking. And then 2 days later, they're hit with their first attack because the Germans do it again and hit the Canadians dead on this time. And there's that famous painting of it. There's no real photos of what happened. That comes later. Canada does a very good job of documenting its experiences in the First World War on the Western Front. But nothing yet. So we see some of the aftermath and things like that. But this asphyxiating gas, there's stories of, of the rags that are covered in urine as being, done ahead of time, or being studied ahead of time, or being done in the spur of the moment. It is used. Where the idea comes from is a bit confused and everything. Another major issue at Second Ypres is the infamous Ross rifle. My own accounts, YouTube, I don't pretend to be a fan of this rifle. I think it's a thing of hubris and Canadian isms, and it just gets Canadians killed because it doesn't operate properly in trench conditions. So they call it the Ross Club because it will just stop firing. It'll jam and be useless, especially as a horde of Germans are coming at you behind a wall of gas. So at Second Ypres, it's a bit of an issue, and it's mentioned in multiple sources and war diaries and that nature. So Second Ypres, they eventually do sort of stabilize the line. The salient is reduced because of this, but the Germans don't get the breakthrough they're hoping for.
Mhm.
And the Canadians, are rightfully hailed as holding the line, helping the French troops reestablish the positions. The British also come in and help fill the gaps. But that's the first major one. It's massive news across Canada, obviously, because the casualty lists start pouring in, which is going to become commonplace, right, for Canada throughout the war, of these massive casualty lists that don't stop until November 1918 and beyond. But that's the first real test for Canada in the war.
I can't help but imagine that having a constant flow of casualty lists at your doorstep is necessarily feeding or helping to stave off any of the animosity and any of the ill feeling that's in Canada already.
Yeah.
It is only adding fuel to the fire of some of those protests.
Yeah, it definitely gets heavier and weighing on people. The thing I forgot to mention is Canada's only 8 million people in 1914. It's not a lot of people at all, especially when you know how many people are contributing to this, 100,000 or so plus in uniform, just in the army. That's a lot, and 66,000 die. And that's a massive number for such a small country. So, and that begins really at Second Ypres. Holding that famous salient, which they will come back to in many times, but back in 1916 and then back in 1917 again for the big one that everybody knows.
Yeah, at Second Ypres, obviously the infamous use of chlorine gas, is one of the creations of Dr. Fritz Haber, which he's such a complex character, because Haber, has a Nobel Peace Prize for being part of the Haber-Bosch process that and fixes nitrogen into the ground and helps feed the world, changes agricultural science forever.
Yep.
But he's also the father of toxic gas.
Yep.
And just kind of reading up about Second Ypres is that the French are absolutely decimated by this chlorine gas.
Yep.
And there's always, because historians have a weird, sick, twisted sense of dark humor. I always see, historical memes that are like, why is the air so spicy?
Yeah, spicy air. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's terrible, but kind of, it's terribly funny, but not.
Well, the thing is, Canadians by the end, the Canadian Corps comes to use gas nonstop. They really embrace it and use it effectively for what it is.
Right. And the Canadians, what they are, especially able to do at Second Ypres is hold the line, because without them there, that, who knows, that line could have easily been broken. And I think it's I'm curious to see if you would agree, Brad, is it at Second Ypres that the Canadians become the fierce, tenacious fighting force that the Germans come to fear later in the war?
I don't know. That's a reputation that it's hard to track. I think it starts there in some respects. I mean, sometimes the Germans don't really know the difference between the Canadians, the Brits, the Australians, the New Zealanders, even the South Africans. They don't know. Some of them don't care. Sometimes they do. Depends, right? Because sometimes trench warfare is a lot of sitting around, so you know who's across from you. But sometimes the Germans didn't seem to care. Depends again. Later on, I'd say yes, that is kind of the Germans' overall opinion of the Canadians, especially in 1918. But yeah, Second Ypres is more of that, just getting that name, right? There are these supposedly unruly colonials who live in the farms and the woods and igloos and, brawl with each other and have no sophistication and all that kind of stuff, which is not really the case, but that's how they're seen in a lot of ways. And that's how they're still presented today, which is not really true. But yeah, it's really definitely the start of the reputation of the Canadian Corps, as they later become termed the shock troops of the British Army.
So after we could sit here and talk about trench warfare and all these other things, but I feel like that's that's a whole series that we should do, Bo. It's just the First World War in the trenches, and just be stuck with it.
Brew in the trenches.
Yeah,
lots to talk about.
That's right.
That's the crew is in the trenches too. But what comes next for the Canadians at the front?
So something I like to keep in mind in all of this, right? Because I mentioned that there's this first contingent that morphs into the first division. They're raising more divisions at home. So you have the second divisions also being raised pretty much right away. Canada is upping its commitment as the war goes on, eventually reaching 5 divisions, 4 in the line. Second division is coming online. They come later. One battle that really gets no attention, unfortunately, and there's a whole memorial there and everything, just like all the other memorials for the battles that people know, is Hill 62. This is, a major hill for Belgium, for Flanders. It's not that massive in terms of other places in the world, but in the place, and again, this is back in the Ypres salient. It's massively important. Why I like to talk about this one specifically is the photos and stuff we have aftermath are just shocking, right? These are supposedly taking places in places like Kitchener's Wood. There's no trees left. The artillery is so awful that it just destroys everything. And again, I've read accounts of some soldiers who fought through the whole war are saying the bombardment they faced in June 1916. So this is right before the infamous Battle of the Somme begins. The Canadians are fighting against a German limited offensive here. They say it's the worst artillery they'd ever been under, which is surprising given what's coming for some of these guys, right? What they're going to go through. And this is one that's stuck in their memory as awful. A Canadian general is killed because of this. He's visiting the front line and gets caught in a bombardment and is killed. It's a back and forth battle. I have a video about it on my own channel looking at this one because I think it's just underserved and it's not as well visited as some other places that get a lot of attention for the Canadians and particularly in the Ypres salient, right? Because Passchendaele obviously comes later. It takes a lot of attention away, but this is really where the Canadian Corps is coming together as a corps, right? Because now you have 2 divisions that will be working in concert with each other. Coming online again, and the third will come as well. That's coming later. But like I said, Canada's not, and I wanted, if that's okay, we just jump into it, is the next big one I wanted to talk about is the Somme. Right? Mm-hmm. Canada is not involved in that awful first day, right, of July 1st, 1916. Canadian Corps is not there. The Newfoundlanders are there. I'm going to include them. They're not part of Canada, but they are now, so I'm going to include them. They're a battalion in the 29th Infantry Division. They go over the top at Beaumont-Hamel, which is a Canadian site now. It's the one with the caribou. It's one of the many with the caribou that you see. It's a slaughter. They are hit really bad, and it has generational effects in Newfoundland because they're such a small country. Dominion later on, it just has a massive impact on Newfoundland, and still today has residents in that part of the country because July 1st is Canada Day, right? Our day of Dominion Day, as it called back in the day, but it's also a day of remembrance in Newfoundland because of what happens on the Somme. Mm-hmm. So this photo is used all the time for Canada's war. This is troops coming back from the fighting of the trenches of the Somme, right? The Canadians don't come in until later. They're supported actually by the first tank attack in history in warfare. The Canadians are part of that at Flers Courcelette. Canadians are fighting around Courcelette. This is your typical, stereotypical trench warfare, right? You can see it, the mud, the deprivation, the terrible weather. It's wet, it's cold, nonstop. The weather never seems to get better. I've been there in June. I was at this spot literally in June a few years ago, and it was snowing. I was like, am I at home in Canada here? It was really, it's this seemingly awful weather all the time in that part of France. I don't know what it is.
All I have to think is like, can you imagine the first person to see, a tank and think, what is this angry tractor doing?
Yeah.
Well,
lucky for the Germans facing them, they didn't do too much. They were highly unreliable at the time. Most of them don't even make the front line. And so luckily for them, but some of the Germans do break, but not enough. Right, Courcelette is a nasty battle that goes on for 2-ish and a bit months until the final taking of what's called Regina Trench and behind Courcelette, which really ends the Battle of the Somme. So the Canadians are there at the end. This is the 3rd Division is now in the line as part of this. 4th Division is now coming online. So the Canadian Corps is coming together for as a full corps of what it's going to be. So that's all the infantry battalions, artillery as well. There's also cavalry, but they're kind of doing their own thing off with the Brits. They have, things like guarding POWs, things like that. They're not used in the role that they're intended to be used for. That comes later on. Filling the line as part of the spring offensives, and then into the 100 days, they fill that more traditional role they have. So this is predominantly for Canada's fight is an infantry artillery battle. Which it will remain for the entirety of the war. But yeah, I do encourage people to look at, the Somme from the Canadian perspective and the events beforehand for 1916 specifically, because the one to talk about next is Vimy Ridge. It's the battle. It's the symbol of not even just Canada's First World War, but Canada's military history. I've been on the record many times. I think it's overblown that we use this as a symbol. It's not Canada's greatest victory, not even close. People are going to come after me, but whatever, I'm used to it. It's this first time that all the divisions fight together. Okay, that's great. That's the first time they attack together on the same day. That's cool. All the divisions had fought in the line at the same place before. That's not new. This just happens to be the first offensive. They're all fighting together. There's a ton of myth around this thing. I've talked about this at length on my own channel. Of what Vimy represented. It seemed to be as a war-winning battle, which it's not. Just look at the events of the war, and we know that this doesn't really change much, right? It's part of a much larger offensive, the Arras offensive, that kind of fails. This is a bright spot, but also something from the Canadian perspective, which I'm trying to stay on here without going on tangents, but from the Canadian perspective, this is the bloodiest day in Canadian history, not just Canadian military, Canadian history. This is this great victory. I mean, it takes a few days, but April 9th, 1917 is by far the day with the most Canadians dying. Is at Vimy Ridge. This great victory where all Canada comes together. You hear the nonsense of we went up the ridge as, Ontarians and Nova Scotians and from Saskatchewan and came down Canadians. That's said in the 60s. That's not said in 1917. So, this is a whole other thing. A lot of Canadians are aware of this, but it's used as a symbol, and I don't think it should be in that way because it just doesn't match the historical record. I mean, it's a impressive site. I'm not going to take that away from them. Where the memorial is, and it's a moving memorial. It has all the names of the Canadian missing in France who have no known grave, or all the names are inscribed on it. So it's a moving memorial. It's a moving location. Got this almost religious-like resonance to it, but it's not this war-winning great victory that we like to present it as. It's very limited, and the strategic position is bettered by it. I mean, the photo you can see here is the backside of the ridge, which they fought to take, and why it's important for them to hold it. I mean, the Germans don't attack it ever again. I don't blame them. This is the worst side to attack from. Canadians attack from quote unquote the easier side. But why it's got such an importance, and I have to talk about this, is because we use it as this marker of our betterness, which is not very Canadian, stereotypically, saying we're better. I mean, maybe that's changing with current events, but things like the French failed to take it. They fought for it in 1915 and didn't take it. It's always erroneously claimed that the British tried to take it in 1916. They didn't. They just held the line. So we take it in 1917, and we're the best. We took this thing that the big guys couldn't take. Okay, great. There's going to be nasty comments, but I know it's coming. But it's so overblown to me for what it represents. And I think the greatest moments of the Canadian Corps are yet to come. And we don't talk about them in this country at all, which is unfortunate.
I was going to say, if not Vimy Ridge, then where is the cornerstone? Where does Canadian Corps lay its concrete?
We'll get there. It's one of the photos. So I planned this. So yeah, Vimy is in April 1917. Like I said, the Ross offensive broadly doesn't go well. Of course, there's no breakthrough, which leads to a shift in strategic thinking, which shifts back north, back to our favorite, the salient again. Again, this offensive kicks off with the Canadians not in the front line, not as part of it. They come in later, they close it out. In what becomes kind of the defining part of the battle, and literally the name of what it's called, right? The Canadian Corps takes I wouldn't even say smashed remnants. There's nothing left of the village of Passchendaele. There's literally nothing left of it when they take it. They don't even know they're in it when they take it. They think they saw some bricks sticking out of the mud, and that's how they knew they were in the center of Passchendaele, or what was the center of Passchendaele. It's been rebuilt, beautiful, it's great. Now, this photo is used all the time for everybody, right? It's a Canadian photo though, of the tank and the explosion and the mud, and that's come to define the First World War in a lot of people's minds is this, and it's no joke. That mud, I've been there, it's ruined a good pair of shoes of mine. So it's still it's mucky. People would just disappear. Guns would disappear. Like 18-pounder guns would just fall below the mud, never be seen again. It's a brutal battle. The commander of the Canadian Corps at the time, closes out the war, Arthur Currie, who is Canadian born, trained, doesn't want to go there. He doesn't want to fight there because he was at Second Ypres. He was there through the fighting at Hill 62, and then after that as well, he was at Vimy Ridge commanding the 1st Division. He's seen all of this. He doesn't want to go up there. It's a bit of an issue with the British commanders and all that kind of thing, but he knows what it's going to take, and it's going to take a lot of casualties, and he's bang on with his estimate. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but he's within a few hundred of the casualties they end up taking at Passchendaele, and it's a lot, right? And this is coming after the heels of Vimy Ridge, and then also another battle that I failed to mention in August 1917 is Hill 70, which is a success. They use the Germans, doctrine of constant counterattack against them. They know they're going to do this, and then they take the Hill 70 and then just pummel them as they come in. And it's a good Canadian victory in that sense, and it doesn't get a ton of attention because of things like Passchendaele. So that comes on the heels of all of this. So again, I wanted to keep that in mind because the manpower issues are becoming really, really bad, by November 1917, when we're looking at here with the Battle of Passchendaele. Again, this ends that massive, Third Ypres offensive, which doesn't do what they hope it'll do, right? They want to reach the Belgian coast and cut off the U-boats, which they come nowhere close to doing. And a lot of Canadians die for a chunk of land that's later given up without a fight. So it's seen in a lot of ways as futile, and it is. I mean, this is a war of attrition as well that can never be forgotten. The Allies have more people than the Germans do, so that's part of the strategy. Call it whatever you want. That's the nature of warfare, particularly this war. So the Canadians are, filling their part of it, and again, getting more accolades. They're piling them up as they go along. I mean, they bring Passchendaele to an end by taking the village and somewhat of the high ground beyond, again, using the term high ground very loosely in Flanders, but it's part of it. But again, it's abandoned as the German spring offensives get underway in 1918.
So, because we were kind of talking, going back to the beginning on the home front, things that are happening there, I feel like we often overlook the impact of morale. And I know I talked about this a second ago in my last question, where we were talking about how this isn't helping the anti-conscription movement, but there has to be a slowing at some point in the willingness to volunteer, certainly. And then there has to be an overwhelming resentment to the conscription of troops at home. But how are the conscripts viewed when they get to the front around volunteers who've been there maybe for a year, 2 years, who have been at places like Ypres and have been at Vimy Ridge and are now, faced with this brand new guy who they had to drag him out and force him to fight?
Right. And it again, to me, it's a fascinating story. I mean, I mentioned a personal family connection to this. Initially, and I think I'd have to look at this in two parts, right? You have that contentious election that I'm talking about. Canadian troops are voting in that election. They overwhelmingly vote in favor of the Union government. They want conscription. They want conscripts at the front line. Like guys that have been wounded multiple times are being sent back to the front line, which they were told was not going to happen. I bring that up because it's an interesting comparison to the Australians who vote no. The Australian troops vote no. They don't want conscripts near them. The Canadians vote yes. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, I don't think a ton of work's been done at looking at those in comparison, but it stands out as a very massive difference. But once the conscripts get there, they really come into the line and spring 1918, they really start to fill in spots in what becomes known by certain early Nazi of Ludendorff of August 8th, 1918, the Black Day of the German Army. That's when the conscripts are really starting to come into the line because the Canadian Corps, along with the Australians, is the spear point of the Battle of Amiens, right? The massive breakthrough that happens that starts the end of Germany's war for them. So it fills an important part of keeping the Canadian Corps up to strength. This might be a little nitty gritty, but the Canadian structure is different than the British. They have basically what are termed oversized units. They want to keep them stronger so they can have more of a punch, right? They wanted to thin out the lines. They wanted to create a Canadian army, right, made of two corps. Currie, the commander, says, no, I want this strong, and I need engineers. So we need bodies in the line. So this is all kind of trickling down. But once the conscripts get there, I've read nothing of them not fulfilling their duty. Doing well. A lot of them are decorated. Some get promoted, which you would not expect, especially in such a short time frame. But that does happen. I think promoted a corporal. A few were made sergeants actually. And one thing I do want to talk about real briefly is the conscription stuff, because particularly in Canada, it's looked at such a black and white issue, right? You don't want to go, you want to go, right? In Canada, it's not quite I don't think it's ever the case really anywhere, but in Canada, there are those who maybe wanted to fight, but the family said, no, you're not going. Why would you go? We need you at home. Like that happened with my great grandfather. He was kept at home on the farm saying, are you nuts? Like you're not going to fight. We will starve, So there's other stories of people who were following basically like the French model or what the Brits eventually do of like, I'm not going to sign up because my time is coming anyway. Might as well enjoy it before they pick me up and I go. So it's a more complicated issue than I would say than people, think of it as. And this is no different. The Canadians who come into the line, again, I heard nothing of them not doing what they do or doing what they do well and filling the positions. And the performance of the Canadian Corps through the 100 days, I think, shows that. They don't stop from August 8th, basically. They just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And coming back to that earlier question of what I think is the battle, it's, again, very little known. The Battle of Canal du Nord. It's named after the canal that was part of the German line. There you can see it was dried, used as a part of the Hindenburg line in a way as the defensive. I would say this is Canada's greatest battle. So this is late September 27th. It's a bit of a crazy plan. Currie was an amazing strategist and tactician. He was terrible at things like business. He lost a ton of money. He actually embezzled a ton of money from his regiment. It was a whole to-do. I encourage people to look up at that story because it's a bit wild. But he was an amazing strategist. So he's cramming basically 2 divisions along a 4 battalion front.
Wow.
So that they can get through this gap that they've basically blasted in the German line through this canal. Like that's what you can see, the bridging and the horses and everything. They have to bridge it to get the guns up. And move, because then they fan out. And to me, it's just extremely well planned, and it's done very quickly because the Canadians had broken through another part of the line in early September. So they don't have a ton of time to plan this one like Vimy, which is planned for 6+ months. This thing's planned in a couple of weeks, and terrain that they don't know and aren't staring at every day, right? That had been held for years. This is on the fly. This is the Canadian Corps at its best. I mean, it grounds down like eventually all of them do, but they eventually push up to take the important center of Cambrai, which is a rail center. And then from there on out, they don't really stop from early October to November 11th, where they reach Mons in Belgium, where the British Expeditionary Forces war begins and ends, actually. There you have members of the 42nd Battalion, which regiment is the Black Watch, which is the Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. We love the most confusing names possible in the Canadian military. If we can confuse you, we will do it. And we'll even do that with what the Canadian Army is even called. We didn't even call it the Canadian Army until later. It's wild. Anyway, if we can confuse you, we will. So yeah, this is a photo of the war ending, right? This is why they're sitting down. They're like, it's over. We're done. They literally just sit there and wait because that's what they're told to do. And I can't be remiss if I didn't tell the story of the last Canadian killed is George Lawrence. He's killed. He's a conscript. George Lawrence Price, sorry, is killed a few minutes before 11. They're not really sure what happened. He just got out of the whatever. I don't want to say trench, but foxhole, dugout, whatever, and gets hit by a sniper. They're not really sure what he was doing, but he gets killed, and he's the last British Empire death in the war.
Wow.
He's buried in the same cemetery as the first. So it's got this symbolism of the war is ending where it begins for the British Empire. Obviously, it's different people, right? It's Canadians, but still part of the empire at the time, very strongly, as we talked about. So, I mean, that's a really rough shot view of the Canadian Corps' war. Of course, you have the Canadian navies protecting convoys in the North Atlantic, and you have Canadians in the Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service, which becomes the RAF, like Billy Bishop, William Barker. These are massive names, but they're small in comparison to what the Canadian Corps is doing. And many historians have said this is the greatest thing Canada's ever done, is the Canadian Corps in the First World War as a national effort.
So where would you place them? Let's think, in studying memory of the First World War, where do you put the Canadians? Or where is their place in memory, I guess?
Of the Canadian Corps? Of one of success and constant success. Canada doesn't, I mean, you can argue, depending on how you look at it, they don't lose a battle, really. I mean, you could say second heat, but they don't fall back like they could have. It's a stalemate. From then on out, they don't really lose. They don't really lose much ground. They're constantly on the push. They're, like I said earlier, they're called the shock troops. They're used as a spear point. The Germans know if the Canadians are in the front line, something bad's about coming their way. That takes on a bit of, mythology and, we're Canadians, we're badass. There's a lot of truth to that here, though. Like, the Canadian Corps is probably one of the best forces on the Western Front. I mean, you can argue that about any of these units, but as a collective effort, I think the Canadians are doing very, very well. People like Arthur Currie, their contribution cannot be diminished because it's him who keeps them up that strength. They're strong, right? The Australians, like I mentioned, don't have conscription. So by the end, they're out of the line, right? Because they can't keep up strength. Whereas the Canadians have the conscription, they can keep pushing. They can keep filling these units and they can keep going. So I think it's obviously, like we talked about, it's contentious, still has resonance today, but that conscription keeps the Canadians fighting. And I'd say they are one of the best fighting forces out there. It's a lot of work. It's nothing ingrained, I would say. It's nothing about the Canadian character, quote unquote. I think that diminishes a lot of work that was put into it, and a lot of a spirit of corps as well that went along with being part of the Canadian Corps. That really, that the veterans did talk about, that they did talk about that is not something that I would diminish, because I've seen the letters, I've seen the diaries, all that good stuff. So they're definitely at the top on the Allied side for sure.
I definitely think one of the most unique aspects of Canada in the First World War is sort of the mobilization of Canada's First Nations. I truly think that a soldier is truly made after Sabaton has made a song about you.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about here. Francis Pegagabagabo, and I butchered his last name, but He becomes a unique scout and sniper for Canada in the First World War. And, it's an amazing song. I mean, the song's name is A Ghost in the Trenches. So is that an accurate title for him?
Oh yeah, he's just one of Canada's best soldiers in the war. It's actually 1st Battalion, which was based around where I'm originally from, London, Ontario, but he's from further up in Northern Ontario a little bit, around Parry Sound, if anybody knows that. That's where he's from. His exploits are just
insane.
Seems fake, like it's a movie or something, and it's not. It's all what he did. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. He's like you said, he's Indigenous. He's from First Nations. He's got no political rights at the time. Can't vote. Can't really own property. Everything's done through what are termed Indian agents at the time. He could enlist. That was pretty much it. All he could really do. And he did it, and a lot of them did. Massive amounts of Indigenous people enlisted. When the country did not support them, they supported the country. And this doesn't end either. This goes on to the Second World War as well. Just did a massive project actually looking at this. One of the units in that part of Hong Kong. Massive amounts proportionally of Indigenous soldiers. Even the First World War, I think actually maybe it's proportionally higher. Could be mistaken, but his exemplary service. He's covered in the Canadian War Museum, rightfully so. He really should have a movie because it's just, we have some tales that I'm pretty sure are mostly made up, but his is not. His is just bonkers, like what he was able to do. Again, for a country that didn't support him and he didn't need to be there, it's just wild.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And something I try to stress to my students especially when I talk about, the Second World War, how, Native Americans, are the largest minority, to sign up, to go to war. They view the Japanese and the Nazis as a threat to their homeland. And of course, the Navajo make a name for themselves as, your code talkers in the Pacific, and they have a very unique history. But Brad, we could talk about that all day. We could talk about Canada at war all day. But we do have a segment of this show that's called Boohickey History. Okay. And I know that we kind of brought up something a little earlier. So I'm kind of curious to see if you expand upon some Boohickey history behind Canada at war in the First World War. And I guess what Boohickey is, I guess explain that, is something that is absolutely ridiculous, something absolutely rubbish, something that people get wrong, something that people misinterpret. Bad history.
Oh, geez, bad history in Canada in the First World War. How much time you got? Oh, geez. What do I pick? Oh, man. Should have prepared for this one.
I was going to say, what's like your biggest,
like what do you see on Twitter or on Blue Sky? And you're like,
oh man, never stops. I'm gonna do it again. I already brought it up, but it's the Ross rifle because it's such a Canadian thing. Like, how do I explain this? It was terrible for what it was. It was a target rifle, basically designed before the war. The inventor of it, I've literally held the letter in my hand, which is kind of cool if the guy wasn't kind of nuts. Him to the defense minister. And his correspondence with the defense minister, Sam Hughes, about this rifle and how it was supposedly this great thing. Like, we hear the stories all the time of Canadians junking this thing and picking up the Lee Enfield. Like, that happened at Second Heap. Sam Hughes is literally telling the inventor of the Ross rifle, Ross, that Brits are throwing away the Lee Enfield to pick up the Ross. And I went, this guy's nuts. Like, that's just never happened. Like, this guy, this defense, we could do a show on Sam Hughes and his insanity. Like, he was a teacher and he would like chew the chalk as he's teaching the class. Like, this guy was just bonkers. Yeah, he's nuts. Anyway, so like that one to me, and then people will still defend it because it's Canadian, I think. Even though it was terrible for the trenches, it would jam. It was easy-ish to mass produce, but the Brits weren't making it, right? The ammunition didn't work with it well, so we just switched to the British supply. And people will now still defend it, saying, eventually I was like, Mark, I don't even know. I'm like, 8, 7? It's like, it finally was good for the trenches. And I went, great, that's 17.
Yeah, it's 1927. Who cares?
Yeah, like, it doesn't really matter at this point. It wasn't going to do them any good at the time. We needed this. We just needed to integrate into the supply chain anyway. which they couldn't have done without anyway. So what one thing, who cares? They still did this stuff. Why do we have to defend this rifle that is used into the Second World War as Canadian? I mean, I think they delivered a bunch to the Soviet Union in 41. I'm like, it just seems mean, but okay. Like it's got this weird mythology. People still defend it. People will defend Hughes as well for the decisions made around it. And I don't buy it. It just got Canadians killed. I mean, when they needed this thing to work, it wouldn't. And it just drives me a little crazy that this thing still has defenders because people like to use it for target practice now. Like, well, right in a trench when you're exhausted, haven't slept in days, haven't eaten enough, covered in mud, and it's been raining. And oh yeah, there's Germans coming at you after they've launched a bombardment with gas. Then we'll talk. It's just, it kind of drives me nuts. It's probably the most niche thing you guys had on here, but it's just, I mean, I could pick so many things. I could have picked the conscription thing, but we talked about that enough. But the Ross it's just, I don't know. I think it's like a Canadian pride thing because we have, again, I'll get yelled at, but so little. When it comes to this unique Canadianness, the Ross is this weird symbol now, and I'm still just never going to be a fan, no matter how many people send me emails and trying to send me proof of how this thing is great. I'm not buying it.
My friend Erica Osen, who is she works with the William Britton Toy Company. She's great. She's Canadian. And when last I was with her, and I think I've actually talked about this on the show before, but she was talking about how there was a contest at home in her local paper for a Canadian slogan.
Yeah.
And it was like, Canadian is maple syrup. Canadian is this.
Yeah.
The winner ended up being Canadian as possible given the circumstances.
Yeah, that was done in the centennial in 1967. As Canadian as possible under the circumstances.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better slogan to come up with as a Canadian. It's perfect because it's true.
Fits, works.
It's great. Yeah.
Bo, you know what it's time for? It's time. Brad, what is in your cup?
Well, unfortunately, not very interesting. Just some of Ottawa's finest water here because I still have some work to do, but nothing interesting, unfortunately, because it's kind of still a work day for me. But yeah, just my local water, unfortunately.
There we go. Bo, how about yourself?
So, again, my youngest brother Brady works at alcohol heaven. Total Wine. If they don't have it, you don't need it. He brought to my house a bottle of Kings Creek, Tennessee whiskey cider black label. And that is what I have been sipping on. It's also a work day for me, but there's no better way to do state trainings than a little unsober.
There you go. There you go.
So, Joey, how about yourself?
I'm back to be Debbie Downer for you. I am drinking green tea with an orange slice and a little bit of lemon in there too. Yeah.
I become the corner alcoholic in the show.
You had to be. Yeah. Sorry.
I do what I can.
But, bright side, feeling better, doing better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's that. Brad, anyways, we wanted to thank you for coming on the show, certainly, but also wanted to encourage people to find you and find your channel. So where can we send people? Where can people go and catch up with you?
Well, my biggest effort is YouTube by far. I have tons of videos that look at kind of some of the stuff we talked about today. And I did a massive, I call it the Canada Normandy project last year. That's still kind of ongoing, right? Because the 80th was of D-Day and the Normandy campaign was last spring, massive one. But I've looked at all kinds of topics. I mean, I do live streams as well, which I think are fascinating with all kinds of different people. I've done shows about a Canadian raised regiment of the Continental Army, the American Revolution, through to what's the more recent ones we've done? About Monty and Con, and we've done the Vietnam War. Yeah, we've done. I've done a whole bunch with a whole bunch of great people, and just get to learn about different topics that are just military history related, and give a chance to talk about the people about their work and connect with my community. Of course, I'm biased, but I think are great people because they're always willing to learn, which is something I'm very proud of to be part of.
Awesome. Well, we're going to drop the link for your YouTube channel down in the show notes. Awesome. But Bo, I think we've done our part too. I think we've done all that.
I think we've home brewed.
We have brewed. We have brewed. Brad, thanks for coming and joining us to talk a little bit about Canada and the First World War. Again, Brad St. Croix. You can find more information down in the show notes and in the description of this video. Bo, until next time, see you later.
Cheers, everybody.